Okay, welcome to the Agra Museum. The museum is actually the Denis name for this building, although we do not know what the word for museum is in Denis. We get that name from a pamphlet that was found and which is in DRC possession. Despite the name, the museum had few exhibits that were actually inside the building. Instead, it was a type of common library for linking books to observation pods all on the same world. Of the books that were once held here, only 4 remain out of at least 25 that we know about. The museum is a building with a rooftop similar to that of Tokita 2, the Tokita rooftop. However, inside, there are only 2 floors, the lower of which is currently inaccessible. There are wall and railing decorations that are the same rayed hand tree design as those as found in the Great Library at the other end of the island. That may indicate that both buildings serve much the same purpose, which was to hold public linking books with a common theme. The main entrance door is currently locked open. That's because back in 2007, when the library was opened, the door malfunctioned often, and it would trap explorers inside or prevent some from getting inside. The door was designed to sink into the ground when it opened. Okay. You have to excuse me, but somebody just laughed themselves into falling over the rail. Okay, anyway, back to the door. When the door functioned properly, instead of opening upwards or to the side, it would drop down into the ground. However, because it malfunctioned quite often, the DRC finally opened it one day and then cut power to it so that it would no longer come back close. Hang on for just 1 second. Sorry about that. I got a private message from somebody wanting to join us. Okay. Anyway, to prevent the door from ever sticking again, the DRC permanently locked it open. The same thing happened at the Great Library of Aegura. Because the doors kept malfunctioning there as well, they also cut the power to them in the open position. Along the wall surrounding the central opening, which contains a lamp, are 10 linking book pedestals, 5 on each side. On the right-hand side as you enter the building, 4 of the pedestals hold linking books to museum pods. And those are on a world which we believe that an explorer named Tweak named Raziksev, which simply means the pod age in Denis. We know that the age has at least 25 pods, since that number is marked on the map, and Doreno has a number plate bearing the number 25. However, the museum itself apparently could only hold 20 books at a time, so they must have rotated them. I have a personal theory that Riziksev might be the ringed planet around which a moon named Todelmer orbits. If that is correct, then there is a 26th pod in orbit in the ring system. The orbital pod's linking book may sometimes be found on the center pedestal in some versions of the game. I mentioned a little while ago that the DRC found a pamphlet here which was intended to be handed out for the Negalon Museum pod. Here's a translation of it. Negalon Introduction Pamphlet. Welcome to Negalon, home of the infamous Tarpon Shawl and Bezal Pumi. Negalon was one of the first features added to our museum in 8797 at the request of Lord Gerald. At the time, maintainers and museum staff felt that Negalon had been researched enough to approve the age for a museum pod that would allow our visitors to experience the age for themselves. You will notice that all of our pods, including Negalon's, have a few special features. Fortunately, solar power enables our pods to function without outside power sources. However, though our pods will gain power throughout with minimal energy usage, heavy usage will also drain energy units fairly quickly. Be careful not to use up a pod's energy before nightfall, or you may miss out on some sights. Before you visit Negalon, we'd like to take a minute to get you acquainted with the creatures that live there. Please remember that while we have placed our pod in an optimal position, you are visiting a natural habitat, and we have no control over when and where you will see our friends in Negalon, or if you will see anything at all. Our pods do have sound and scent emitters that will attract Negalon's inhabitants, although again, these are real animals and there are no guarantees. Remember too, that all reactions to what you do in Negalon are not always immediately evident. Good luck. The second part of the note was the Negalon creature notes, and that read, rather than give away all of the secrets of Negalon, we want you to find creatures on your own. The following notes are only meant to provide you with an introduction to the natural habitat of Negalon. We will say that if you can't find Kiris, then things aren't going well. The large swarms usually fill the air, especially in the more open spaces. Kiri are one of the sole providers of nutrients for the Irwins. If you see a swarm of Kiris, look out. An Irwin might be nearby. Gippiles are another of Negalon's smaller creatures, although they are a much more colorful variety than the Kiri. Gippiles can often be seen gliding through the air and are a favorite treat for Repas. Nerums are slow-moving and a beautiful native inhabitant of Negalon. During mating seasons, especially at night, you have a good chance of being witness to some beautiful displays by female Nerums. Ask a nearby museum guide for more information on Nerum mating season. Uchaparas, often seen dangling under trees, are actually young tarpon shawls. See if you can follow the tarpon shawl life cycle. We will give you a small hint. You will need to pay close attention to Gotsai. Excuse me, I mispronounced that. That's Gotsai. Pumis hunt in packs and often eat the babies of Negalon's other inhabitants. Pumis will prey on sick, small, or weak adults much larger than them. Pumis like to jump from tree to tree, so you'll have to be quick. See if you can find what likes to eat Pumis. We'll give you a hint. They eat very slowly and live high in the trees. Another of Negalon's inhabitants are fun-loving creatures that like to eat Nerums, Gepili, and other plants and animals. We'll tell you now that, however, they are timid creatures and we often find them far away from the pod. If you happen to see a Repa, consider yourself lucky. Gatsei are usually pretty easy to spot, especially when they're resting, so we'll let you see them if you can find them without any hints. If you see one, notice its stripes. No two patterns are the same. Though Irwins are technically birds, they can't fly. However, with all the Curie around, they don't need to. Irwins are the only of Negilon's inhabitants that mate for life and are often seen in pairs. If you get the chance to see a Ponodoi, you'll see why it has the name it does. That's all we will tell you. The tarpon shawl is Negilon's most famous creature, and if you get a chance to see one drop down on an unsuspecting animal below it, you'll know why. You'll have to look carefully on the high branches. They are sometimes hard to see, but they are worth the effort. As for any other information, you'll have to find it yourself. Good luck, and we hope you enjoy Negilon. Please ask a museum guide if you have any questions or problems. The lower floor of the museum is almost exactly the same as the upper floor, except that it doesn't have an exit on the building entrance side. There are probably stairs from the door at the back of the museum which lead down to to the lower level. That level currently has no linking books or linking book stands. The only other thing that there is to see in the museum currently are 3 paintings out of what, although originally there would have been 4 on this floor and perhaps 4 on the lower floor. These paintings are all of various historical people that the Denis considered important. I'm going to start out over across the room near the rear. It was the painting on the other side of the museum which has disappeared. That one, for some reason, appears to have been deliberately ripped down, judging by the scraps left in the frame. Why, who it was, and why the painting was destroyed is a question that I cannot. I am currently standing in front of a painting of King Careth. Careth was the last king of Denis. After ascending the throne, he made many changes which eventually culminated in the creation of a city council system that was composed of civic leaders and members of the Denis guilds. He turned over rule of Denis to the council and voluntarily abdicated his throne in Denis year 6977, which would have been 679 BC on the surface. Careth was considered the most important king in Denis history, and the Arch of Kings was renamed the Arch of Careth to honor him. This despite the fact that Careth, during his reign, didn't actually accomplish all that much. He spent most of it priming the Denis people to abandon the royal families and go with a system, the city council system instead. And that was actually a uphill battle. The Denis people have been used to having kings rule over them throughout the history of Denis itself and for many thousands of years before on their original homeworld of Garternay. So they actually resisted the idea of not having a king. However, Careth was able, over the course of his reign to convince them that it was time for a change. He did so by telling them things like, the guilds are heart and soul of Denis, and who else is better to rule us but they? When Careth abdicated, he had convinced the people of Denis that a king named Alcindor, who had previously been thought to be the great king from a prophecy book written by a man named Urpa, was not in fact the great king who was prophesied, even though they had previously believed so. And therefore, the ruling council that he was leaving behind was to be a regency until the coming of the great king. However, he very carefully steered them away from realizing that if there were no more kings in Denis, then how on earth would a great king come along? And in that, he proved that he was something of a con man as well as a king. Kind of like a certain U.S. president I could name. Oh well, never mind that. We'll go ahead and move to the next painting, which is right over at the end of the aisle here. As far as Careth being an effective ruler, I would have to say that despite the fact that he was thought to be the greatest king of Denis history, he actually wasn't. He didn't actually accomplish very much during his reign except to convince people that they didn't need him. The painting that you see behind me is of a queen named Lalin. Lalin was the wife of a king named Hemlin and was instrumental in finally ending a virulent disease that had haunted the Denis for centuries. It was called the Pinto Plague. Lalin met Hemlin when he fell ill from the Pinto Plague, and she was assigned by the Guild of Healers, with whom she was associated with the Guild of Healers, but not a member. As a major guild, they did not accept women members. However, she was indeed associated with them and was assigned by the Guild of Healers as the nurse for King Hemlin. Hemlin immediately fell in love with this woman who was sweet, caring, and kind, as well as being quite lovely. And over the course of time that she took care of him, she began to return his affection. Hemlin later attributed his love for Lalin as the reason why he survived the plague. He held on to life with both hands so that every day he could wake up and see her again. Two years later, in Denis year 2257, or 5400 BC, Lalin, who had been researching ages that have been lost over the course of the Pinto Plague, finally found a reference that led the Guild of Healers to one of their lost ages. This, in turn, led to the discovery of a work called the Book of Berini, and that held clues for a cure to the Pinto Plague. The Guild of Healers immediately began treating people and declared the plague eradicated on the very same day that Himmelin and Lalin were married. The story of Himmelin and Lalin is considered one of the great love stories of Denis history. Over the time, Denis artists would write plays, operas, songs, and other, they would do paintings, and in all ways, throughout the rest of Denis history, right up until the fall, the story of Himmelin and Lalin was one of the great stories of Denis, and one that they loved to see. Except, of course, that unlike Romeo and Juliet, Himmelin and Lalin had a happily ever after. I almost forgot to mention, by the way, that the day of the Pinto Plague's eradication and the marriage of Himmelin and Lalin became a favorite date on the Denis calendar for other couples to get married on. And that was also a tradition that lasted right up until the fall of Denis. The final painting here in this room is of King Alcindar. Alcindar was the man who was called the Great King, since he seemed to fit the Denis prophecy that a great king would come to Aegura Island on a boat under the Arch of Kings. By the way, it was a tradition ever since the arch was built that all Denis kings who were about to be coronated would ride a boat underneath the Arch of Kings to try and fulfill the prophecy. However, Alcindar was born during the Pinto War. The Pinto were a people of an age that had been commissioned by a group called the Judges of Yavo, specifically because they were specifically looking for people to be mercenaries for them. The Judges of Yavo were a religious cult that felt that only they knew what was best religiously and politically for Denis. And they wanted to force the rest of the Denis Empire to follow their policies. Therefore, they planned a coup. They needed soldiers to fight for them and had the Book of Pinto commissioned especially in order to find those, to get those soldiers they needed. The world of Pinto was desolate and dying, and therefore the Pinto were promised that if they served the judges of Yavo, they would be given their own ages to rule over. When the Pinto War came, it came as a complete surprise to the rest of Denis, and the war raged for many years. It was during this war that Alcindar was born. The island of Aegura was falling, and the Denis couldn't hold on to major sections of it. Therefore, the king of Denis at the time had his wife, who was just about to give birth, evacuated over to the main Denis city across the lake. And while she was passing in a small boat under the Arch of Kerith, I should say the Arch of Kings, on her way to the city, that's when she gave birth to Alcindar. So that was the first time that a significant event in his life happened while passing under the arch. Later, when after the death of the king of Denis, who had stayed on Aegura in order to fight to lead the fight against the Pinto, Alcindar, who had grown up to be a fine young man and who had devoted his entire life to studying war in order to combat the Pinto, returned to Aegura Island, leading forces that he built up over time in order to retake the island. And it was while he was returning to confront the Pinto that he passed under the arch for a second time. Since his father was dead, this was thought to fulfill the condition of that the great king would come to Aegura Island on a boat passing under the Arch of Kings. Since that seemed to fulfill the prophecy, people began to call him the Great King. Eventually, after many more years of fighting, the Denis were able to kick the Pinto off of Aegura Island and began to fight them in various ages. Eventually, Alcindar was able to contact twin brothers who were leading the the Pinto people and convince them to abandon the judges of Yavo by promising them what the judges had promised but had not yet delivered on, which was an age of their own to call their new home. Alcindar followed through on his promise and had that age commissioned. However, over time, the Pinto eventually wound up believing that Alcindar was going to turn on them. And that feeling was not entirely without substance, because unknown to the Denis people, Alcindar, who had also feared that the Pinto would eventually return, since they were a warlike people, had commissioned the Guild of Healers to create a plague that was tailored to kill them off. He kept that a secret, though, because the rest of Denis would have been completely outraged. The Pinto eventually acted by sending an assassin to try and kill King Alcindar. They failed to kill him, but they did manage to kill his wife and his young son. And that caused him to order the plague released. The plague throughout all of the ages that the Pinto had presence in, and was successful in wiping them out. However, eventually, when it ran out of pinto, the plague began evolving, trying to find new hosts, and became eventually changed so that it began infecting the Denis people as well. And once it did, it became an epidemic that got completely out of control, and for centuries, the Denis were fighting a defensive action. However, the mortality rate was very high and lasted for generations. When he'd seen what was happening, Alcindor announced his involvement in the creation of the plague gathered all of the books linking to infected ages, and then locked himself and the books in the Temple of the Great King, which is currently located under the Guildhall. And he left the throne of Denis to a man named Solaf. Was officially crowned king, and Alcindor was declared to be officially king. However, that proved to be controversial, and much later, strife was born because of it. For one thing, the prophetess who had been assigned to and he did not get along very well, and after his death, it was she in which she claimed Alcindor Denis society and caused more fragmentation among religious groups, as well as quite a bit of controversy among the secular side as well. Okay, do we have any questions about anything I've talked about up to this point? The Book of Pinto was written illegally, Kay. When the judges of Yavo had it secretly commissioned by a renegade writer that you have on inhabited ages. I'm not sure of things like a failed harvest, because the Guild of Caterers, who was responsible for growing, processing, and supplying food to the Denis Empire was a heck of a lot better than that. Generally speaking, they had many ages that were devoted to food production, and a bad harvest in one of them would hardly have to supply of food that they were getting from the others. However, there were assassinations of Denis kings. If I remember correctly, there were at least 3 who died, who were killed in office. Okay, definitely not that, Kay, because the Denis people were highly civilized, so much so that they considered the people of Earth when Anna descended to Denis and described life on the surface. The Denis people thought that the people of Earth were complete barbarians. As a matter of fact, for much of Denis history, there was no death penalty, or at least I should say that there was, but it was so rarely levied that you can pretty much count on the fingers of one hand that people were put to death. The preferred method of dealing with hardened criminals among Denis was simply to exile them to prison ages. Any other questions? Goodbye, Angel. Thanks for coming. Speaking out of character, all 3 of these paintings are actually based on existing artwork on the surface of that we have currently. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. We're going outside the museum, and we're going to stop by the DRC tent. Okay, let's see. Is everyone in voice range? No, Omion is not. Okay, looks like Omion may be AFK, so we'll begin. And thank you, Mirfak. This entire area on the eastern side of the palace is called Tokota. Tokota is a Dene word. However, it is not the name that the Dene would have given to this area. We do not know what that is. Instead, the name Tokata was given to this area by the DRC, and they did it because of what they found here. Tokata means place of locked doors, and the DRC called this everything around here the place of locked doors because that's what they found the most of. Variations of the name appear in various publications, and some were coined by persons as a joke or because they misunderstood what another person was saying. For example, on some maps, the name is Dakota, which was a joke made by deliberately misspelling the name to that of the states of North and South Dakota. On other documents, it is spelled Dakota, which was probably a mistake. Tokota is a building complex that's interconnected and which stretches most of the way up the northeast side of Aegura Island, excluding the ferry terminal and the museum. There are two main structures, and they are most likely the site of administrative offices or perhaps some shopping. Even today, the Tokata 2 complex would have made a fair-sized shopping mall by Earth standards. The only areas of Tokata explorers are able to get into are the Tokata 2 building rooftop, the Kalo Pub, Sharper's Spy Room, and Tokata Alley. There is some reason to believe that Tokata Alley was originally a road to a small district, as a large section of the Tokata area shown on DRC maps, artist concept paintings, and three-dimensional models is completely missing. The alley would have provided access to that district, which may have broken away and fallen beneath the lake. A picture of what the alley may have looked like during the last years of the Dene Empire could once be found on the viewer in the Great Zero, although that has been replaced by a simple image now. The building behind the tent, which you can now see clearly, is called Tokata 1. It borders Tokata Alley and the museum, but like most buildings in Dene, there's more of it underground, or likely to be more of it underground than above the surface. We know that it is connected by rooms or tunnels underneath Tokata Alley to the other side and connected to Tokata 2, the other building. The most notable feature of Tokata 1 is the light sculpture on the roof. The light sculpture is basically just a very large and pretty lamp. However, the Denis like to, and it's meant to supplement the light around this area. However, the Denis love to make these light sculptures as pretty ways of adding to the lighting in the cavern. Tokata 1 is known to be structurally sound, and DRC messages from 2002 indicate that it had passed Phase 5 testing, which is the final level of safety inspections before the public is permitted access to a given area. After it passed Phase 5, however, the DRC moved its headquarters from Corel into this building, and it served as the headquarters until they ran out of funding and left the caverns. The building is still locked because it supposedly contains sensitive documents and linking books for unreleased ages. And that's why we've never been able to get into it. It was in Tokata 1 on about the 3rd floor, if I remember correctly. Let's walk over here. If you look up to the windows on the side of the Tokata 1, you'll see some that are open, or at least one. That open building window is for a conference room where the DRC discussed the restoration of the Age of Peladon, which had been given to Douglas Sharper, who was a consultant for the DRC, but not an actual member. Sharper felt slighted by being left out of those conferences, and therefore he set up a spying room in Tokata 2 directly across the alley from that chamber. When you go to the spy room now and look through the periscope there, this is the room you're looking into. The building over to my left, our left at this point, is Tokata 2, which is a related and interconnected structure, but has a different superstructure above it. Tokata 2, up above, at the very top of this building I'm facing, is where the Tokata rooftop is that you can link to by means of a Baro stone. The Tokata rooftop was used by the DRC as a semi-official headquarters for various, for the groups that were responsible for translating Denis documents. And you can find some of their notes as well as some unreleased publications up there to this day. That device that you see in front of Tokata 1 is a signpost that the DRC set up. It originally made announcements for them. However, after a certain point, they no longer needed them and dismantled them and took them away when they left the cavern. When they were functioning, they were used to give short messages to explorers. The memorial marker. The memorial marker is the same thing except on a larger scale. We are now on top of Tokata 2. Please follow the path of pillars upward. Okay, looks like everyone's in voice range now. The door that I'm standing in front of is the other side of the part of Tokata 2 that holds the rooftop. In other words, the Tokata rooftop is above and behind me. The stairs that we just walked up come all the way up here from inside the building, where there are doors into the corridor to the Kahlo pub, and those are how the Deneb probably would have gotten up here. How they got to the actual rooftop is a bit of a mystery because we never see a door or a roof hatch up there. Presumably, they're hidden under some of the carpets or crates that the DRC put up there for various reasons. So if you've ever wondered how you get all the way up to the top of Tokita without linking there, now you know. The top of Tokita 2 is a fairly complex structure. There are something like or four different patios up here, as well as this hidden staircase, which you can never see from when you're walking up the Great Stairs. Visit the pub long enough and you'll float. The building is actually kind of divided up into about 5 different sections. However, that's not really important for the tour. There are various sections here which have collapsed, and you can see into some of the smaller rooms inside the structure itself. To give you an example, if you look over the edge of that break behind you, you'll be seeing into one of the rooms of Tokita 2 that is exposed to open air at the moment. Tokita 2, like most Dini buildings, is about 2/3 below ground. So the parts that we see when we're walking along the stairs are only a fraction of the total. The building itself is many stories deep and extends all the way down to the ferry terminal. The lowest entrance to Tokita 2, however, is found below this, behind the small DRC tent that's on the second landing from the bottom on the stairs. I'm going to pause here for just a moment to give you a chance to run around up here a little bit. Careful to stay on the stairs or on the landing so that you don't fall off. If you do fall off, then immediately tell Mirabot W in order to catch yourself, because you will panic link if you fall more than 300 feet. So go ahead and take a quick look around, and I'll give you a couple minutes for that. One of the all-time mysteries of Aegura Island is what this door is for. And while I do not have a way of or a concrete answer for you, I can give you what my guess is. First off, this door, there's been several guesses about it. One of which was that it was a place called the Arch Museum, which is a place that's known to exist on somewhere on Aegura Island, but which has never been found. The reason why people thought it might be that is because of the picture of the arch above the door. However, that's actually a common decoration which is found in many places. Also, if you look at the damage to the landing above us, you'll see that it's mostly solid stone. The door itself evidently must lead into a fairly narrow corridor or else a very small room. One of my own guess is that this may have actually been another way into Tokata 2. There was once a wall covering the area that we used to get into the corridor to the Kalo pub. So that would have actually been solid and not a way we could get in. Therefore, this door could lead to a flight of steps that goes down to an extension of that corridor. I gave it a try once by moving through the corridor, through the rubble, and directly to the space behind this. And there is room for the corridor underneath the steps that some of you are standing on at the moment. So that's one possible explanation as to what this door is for. However, again, it's only a guess. For all we know, this may just be a broom closet of some sort. Let's go ahead and walk into the corridor and down near the memorial. This, of course, is called the Explorer's Memorial, but that's not how it started out. Back in 2006, I believe it was, during an episode called Scars, there were two young ladies who, as it turned out, were non-player characters that were part of the community here. They were called Rosette Taylor and Willow Ingberg, who had the nickname of Wheelie. They were constantly running around, making friends with explorers, and generally getting into trouble. One day, however, they reported that they had found a new crack appearing in the museum at the other end of the island, or I should say the library at the other end of the island, and reported that to the DRC. DRC representatives who were on the island at the time all rushed over there to see if it was something that might cause a structural problem. While they were there, Wheelie and Rosette came here. There had been a discovery of a crack into another room somewhere in this building, and they wanted to investigate it. So they had reported this supposed crack in the library in order to divert attention from them coming here. Oh, thanks, Mirfak. When they got here, they climbed down into the crack to explore the other room, where they apparently found some strange markings on the walls. When they were attempting to investigate them, however, a strange Baro appeared in the room with them, and over the course of events, caused a collapse of the roof, which instantly killed Rosette Taylor and injured Wheelie Ingberg. Wheelie later told people by means of her key device that the Baro kept watching her and eventually tried to communicate in what may have been the only incident known of a Baro attempting a human word. That word was Nolobin. It is suspected that the Baro who was in there with Wheelie was the same Baro that Escher, a survivor, I should say, had experimented on to discover the secrets of the Baro linking methods. Just as the DRC was about to rescue Wheelie, apparently the Baro lost patience and killed her. When the DRC got down to the chamber, she was already dead, and they had to. I'm not sure exactly what they did with Wheelie or Rosette after that, whether they pulled them out or if they entombed them in there. But these wreaths were left here in this corridor as at the time as a memorial to the two girls. And eventually this viewer was set up with their names on it. At the time, theirs were the only two names. However, later on, when explorers began dying out of character for a moment, dying in real life, I mean, if the death could be proven by means of an obituary online or something like that, the DRC began adding their names to this memorial, and that's when it became known as the Explorers Memorial instead of just being a memorial to Wheelie and Rosette. There are many stories behind the names that you see on this, and I'm going to give you a little bit of one of them. Janet Pepsi Burris was one of the first group of beta testers for Uru Aegis Beyond Mist, and one of the first members of the Guild of Greeters. Her avatar name came from her favorite beverage, although the H was added later when concerns arose about copyright infringement. This is her story in her own words. I have been a Mist addict since Mist first came into being. I loved Mist, Riven, and I even loved Exile. But none of them had the impact on me that Uru has had. I am an avid fan. I don't see how it could be any deeper than it already was until I made my first steps into Uru. Let me say part of that again and stress what I mean. Until I made my first steps into Uru. Why have I stressed that word? Because I live my days in a scooter or an electric wheelchair. It is my legs. Unless you have ever been likewise confined, you can't completely understand what I am about to tell you. You can imagine what it might be like, but you can't really completely understand it. I have been mostly confined to my scooter from juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which was diagnosed at the age of 13, since I was 16 and I'm now 50. I remember how it felt to run and jump in my mind, but that hasn't been the case for over 20 years now. But I recently was allowed to feel that feeling again. I wouldn't have believed it myself. As much as I loved Myst, Denis, and the whole Atris storyline, I would never have believed what impact a game could have on my life. But it did, and I will be forever grateful to Ran Cyan and Ubisoft for giving me that feeling back. My first night in Uru was so unbelievable. I had heard about the beta test and applied with little hope of getting in since I had never done anything like it before. But I was accepted, and when I entered the desert, it seemed like the start of any game, a fun thing but nothing more. Or so I thought at the time. But as I began my journey, things began to change. It wasn't just the clues and the puzzles, and for that matter, even the beauty I was encountering. It was the way I was beginning to feel inside. I stayed to myself mostly, shy and unsure of myself. But then I met California Grey Wolf, or GW as I affectionately call him. I also met Tink and others, and felt the lure of actually being with fellow misters in this magnificent environment, and the feelings kept evolving. No longer was I just Janet in her scooter in the living room at my computer. I was Pepsi, who could walk and run and jump, and oh God, that was wonderful. When I was in Uru with my newfound friends exploring, I was in Denis with my newfound friends exploring. I could feel myself jump to the ledge in Aegura and get the journey cloth, and I could feel myself running through the puddle of water in Kadesh Teleso while heading for the second puzzle. These were not the only feelings going on, however. I also felt that I was really there when we would gather just to talk or play tag or hide and seek. I have made so many close friends in Uru. This has been a very unique game. Uru is a game that just isn't a game. It's a game that gave me back my legs and let me forget about the scooter while I was there. What has Uru meant to me? It has meant the world to me. Pepsi. When Pepsi Burris died, it was a great loss to the entire community at the time, because she had made herself greatly loved by all the other players. So much so among the players, but also among the people at Cyan. And she was and on her death, she was honored by Rawa, Richard A. Watson, with the first ever memorial message in Denis, which read, Traprad Kautsavan, Traprad Adaran, Yavo Pelelin Yeret Vileon, Shora Pepsi. That translates as, in the rock she lived, in the rock she rests. May Yavo receive her soul. Farewell, Pepsi. As a last note, this memorial is still active. Every once in a while, names are still being added to it. Let's go ahead and move into the pub now. This is called the Kahlo Pub, after an age by that same name. The age was intended to be released, but never was finished because of budgetary concerns. Kahlo was an age with deep canyons, windswept vistas, and when I say windswept, we're talking winds of upwards of 300 miles per hour. And also, it was an age of sport. There were creatures there called the Kamkinta that flew, although they tended to stay inside the various canyons and channels because of the high winds. Whether or not they were intelligent is something that's a bit of a mystery. They may have been, they may not have been. We do know that they had a queen and lived in a hive. And somehow the Dani were either able to tame them or to make a deal with the queen, because the Kamkinta participated in races carrying Dani on their back, in which they would race throughout these canyons and channels on a course which has not been defined. Among the scenery were lots of the type of giant bones that you see in Aegura. The Dani apparently were very fond of the Kahlo races and loved to bet on them, which makes the Kahlo Pub here very likely to have been a Dani sports bar. The various viewers around here either, I don't know if they had moving images or just still images, but supposedly they displayed pictures of the races on Kahlo. And if this was a government office, then presumably it was a place where Dani citizens and specifically the people who worked here could come after a hard day laboring over facts and figures to have a cold one and watch a race. I'm standing next to a pile of rubble which is into a small room. On the other side of that, if you look through the cracks in the rubble, you will see a door. That door leads under the stairs down to the Tokata Alley and presumably across to Tokata 1, which is what I was talking about when I said that the two buildings were interconnected. The other doors, of course, that you'll see, for instance, over to my right and your left, leads into other parts of Tokata 2. Do we have any questions about anything that I've spoken about up to this point? Hurricanes generally get up to around 80, maybe 90 miles per hour. Tornadoes can reach much higher speeds in the hundreds of miles an hour, around 150 or more. I don't recall off the top of my head whether or not tornadoes reach 300. They might, but hurricanes never do. Okay, if we do not have any other questions, we're going to leave the pub and go down to the base of the Great Stairs to the waterfront. I call this area the esplanade. An esplanade is defined as a paved area next to a river or other body of water that is meant for people to stroll on. There are two areas that the esplanade separates. One is the ferry terminal area, and the other is a small cave that leads to a curved walkway. And that's where we're going to go right now. Okay, this curved walkway, according to sketches and models that were made for the area, apparently once led to a marina. A marina, of course, is a series of docks or areas where small boats can be left tethered or moored. Throughout most of Denis history, the only way to get around the islands of the cavern was by boat, or if you had the privileges and the money to do so, you might be able to make linking books that led here to the island. However, the rich and the powerful people who lived here generally would have owned their own private boats, and they would have been kept here in this area. Over to my left, you will see the collapsed section of the library courtyard. That fell down in the year 2002 and was reported by the DRC, who had to investigate the courtyard for structural security or integrity afterwards. Apparently, it was just a matter of, over time, the ground underneath that section of the courtyard had been eaten away and eventually fell under its own weight. You'll see a shadowed area just to the right of the collapsed section of the library courtyard. And that is a tunnel through the ridge of stalagmites, which is the main entrance into the harbor. The Arch of Kings, or Arch of Kerith as it's now known, which you see off in the distance, does have a channel cut through it. However, that is far too narrow for a cargo ship or any of the ferry boats. Small private boats could fit through it. Ferry boats never could. They're much wider than it is. And speaking of ferries, actually no, let's go ahead and talk about the arch a little bit. That arch was originally known as the Arch of Kings, and it was a tradition among the Denis, and I believe I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about Alcindar, to sail under that arch on the day they were coronated, where they would be met here, probably on this stretch of walkway, by the mayor or the harbor master, I forget which one, and officially welcomed to the island as its new king. That arch is a copy of one that had existed on Garternay, and for exactly the same reason. Back in actually, I believe it was thousands of years before the Denis people came to the cavern, there was a man on Garternay named Urpa, who was a prophet of some note and who wrote several books. His most famous one, of course, is simply called the Book of Urpa, and is mainly concerned with a prophecy about a man he called the Great King, who basically, he said, would bring prosperity to the people, right all the wrongs, and bring balance to the force and whatever it is that they may have needed done. The man never appeared, of course, before the destruction of Garternay. So when the Denis people moved here, they decided that they would keep the tradition alive by building an exact copy of the Arch of Kings and following the traditions of it themselves. Sorry about that. I was looking for a reference, and unfortunately I wasn't able to find it. I don't believe it is. I believe it is made out of solid stone. However, if you do look up at the top of the arch, there is a light up there. Uh, and since I don't know of any Denis flying devices, for all we know, that was put there for low-flying Barbara. That was a joke, by the way. Actually, Angel Mist is entirely correct. Because, because there actually was a day and a night here in the cavern, a beacon showing where the arch was would have actually have been quite important. We'll be talking more about that when we get over to the ferry terminal. In any case, the tradition of people sailing under the arch in the hopes that they might be the great king was one that was kept up throughout Denis history after the arch was built. This culminated, of course, in the story of King Alcindor, which I told you up in the museum. However, he wasn't the only one. King Careth was the last king of Denis, also passed under that arch on a boat. However, at the time he did it, he was not the heir to the throne. He had two older brothers who were in line to be to the throne of Denis, and his father had actually not liked Careth or his mother very much. She was his second wife, and had basically exiled them to the city itself. This was because they were members of a cult which did not believe that Alcindor was the great king, and actively spoke against the very idea. And this Careth had been raised with this belief and didn't question it. However, his father decided that he didn't want to have that sort of talk in his house, and so put them up in the city. And for the rest of his wife's life, that is where she and Careth lived. When she finally died, however, Careth came on a small boat across the lake from the city here to the island to present himself before his father and inform him of his mother's death. And it was at that point that the king, who was lying sick in bed, happened to look out a window in the palace and saw him standing proudly in the prow of the boat, looking quite heroic. And he said that he had a vision of sorts in which led him to recant his previous dismissal of his son, and instead he transferred the title of Crown Prince from the older brother to Careth. And so Careth did indeed become the king. And the rest, of course, was history, because Careth's very first, basically his lifelong task as king, and it was a very short career as king, was simply to get rid of the job. Okay, and now let's go ahead and walk over to the ferry terminal, and we'll try to wrap this up fairly soon. Okay, we've made the barrier invisible, however, it is still here. I wanted you to be able to clearly see the door that's behind me along this short walkway. That door leads into what I suspect is the harbor master's offices and perhaps some sort a type of control center for the harbor activities. The tower itself is made up of three main sections. Directly behind this door, there is a large room. However, we don't know what it contained for a reason that I'll be showing you in a few minutes. Also on the other side, above that large room, there is another room which has a series of panoramic windows which goes around at least half of the tower. And that would be the harbor master's office itself, where they could see and keep and regulate the boat traffic. Above that, there is another section which apparently was a beacon or lighthouse. And curving over that originally would have been two reflectors, because the beacon itself points upward at an angle. So I had mentioned earlier about the light on top of the Arch of Kings as being for navigation, and that is what the beacon on top of the harbor master's office was for. Throughout most of the Denis Empire, the algae in the lake would get bright and dark on a 30-hour cycle, giving them a very distinct day and night, and it did get quite dark during night. So when boats were navigating, having lights to show them where important things were was very much a necessity, just as it is for boats navigating at night on Earth's oceans and lakes. Okay, we want to walk back up just a little bit so that we can see the side of the ferry terminal. Looking upward at the side of the terminal, above the pillars that are spaced along it, you will see Denis writing. That writing is a message which can also be found on the Arch of Kerith, various shops in the Canyon Mall, and on the library, and also, strangely enough, in some of the residential neighborhoods. However, it was, speaking out of character for a moment, it was only ever intended to be seen here on this building. Rawa mentioned that its appearance in other places was a case of the game designers who were working on them needing Denis writing for various places and having that example and going nuts with it. The writing reads, Rabantano Tenienshimti, which means the island welcomes you. Go ahead and walk underneath the arches so that we're looking at the remnants of the wall that separated the docks from the rest. If you look carefully at this wall, you'll see that there are a number of faces on it. If I remember correctly, there's something like 3. And next to one of the faces, there is a word in Latin letters, which I cannot explain, and I can't explain the reason why it's there. I have no idea. The word is privilegia, which is Latin for privileges. I went by this wall for many years and never once noticed this tile design of the faces on it. It took an explorer named Page pointing it out to me for me to spot these. This same design is repeated further down the wall, although that part is even more damaged than this one. I have no idea. I've never found any mention of these faces or why that particular word is written here in Latin characters. This face, if you look up at the around the temple of the head, that's where that word is. Okay, now that it's very close. It's privilegia. Okay, let's go ahead and walk through the door to the other side. By the way, above that door, you will see the same design that's above the door on the Great Stairs. As far as the docks themselves go, since the Nexus and Key devices were not developed until near the end of the Denis civilization, boats were the primary means of transportation around the islands in the Cavern. There were a great many boats that plied the waters of the Denis caverns, both noble and working class. However, private ownership of boats would have restricted access to public buildings and areas, and made travel problematic for many Denis citizens. However, that issue was not considered very important by the government and was not dealt with for thousands of years. Finally, in the Denis year 5202, the public ferry system was approved by Emmen. This offered much more frequent access between the island, the city proper, and surrounding smaller islands. Emmen gave one of those islands to the minor guild of artists, musicians, and actors, who turned it into a cultural center. In later years, the center often hosted outdoor concerts, plays, and other events on the water near the island. By the way, in the past, there actually was a soccer ball here in the dock area, similar to Eddy or Sandy. This one was red and white and had writing on it, which read in Denis letters. However, it wasn't actually Denis. It was a joke by one of the members of the DRC who apparently supplied the ball. The Denis letters were an English phrase which read Denis soccer ball. Speaking out of character for a moment, the ball was removed from the game, however, because it was glitched and you could only kick it along one of the wall, and it could never get it to do anything else. Like the beach ball Eddy and the soccer ball named Sandy, that ball did have a nickname by early explorers. Unfortunately, I can't remember it. Saying I'm hoping that someday somebody will remember it and remind me of what it was so I can write it down. The DRC, by the way, at one point were investigating the possibility of raising one or more of the ferry boats and putting them back into operation. It was always intended that eventually they would open up sections of the Denis city to explorers, and presumably the ferry boats would have been one of the ways to get there. However, like so many other things, when they ran out of funding, that idea had to be abandoned. However, at the end of this dock, if you look out at the ferry boats there, you will occasionally see lights moving in the water. Those lights were a diving team that the DRC hired to investigate this, the structure and viability of raising the ferry boats. Speaking out of character again, that of course was back in the past, so I'm not, although the lights are still visible today, I'm not sure why they never disabled them. And finally, we come to this beastie I'm standing next to. Early explorers nicknamed this the Dalek, after the critters from Doctor Who. But this is actually a light meter. When the Age of Urkana was released by the DRC to explorers, they had as much interest in renewing the lake algae and increasing light levels in the character as the Denis had back in their own day. So they encouraged explorers to make as many pellets as they possibly could and drop them into the lake at the Urkana silo. And they put this meter here as a way of trying to encourage their progress. That turned out to be a mistake. the meter here was only here. The meter was only here for about 6 months, because what you're seeing it doing right now, which is varying between 0 and 1, is all it ever did back then when they were at the height of trying to renew the lake algae. The reason for that is because nobody took into account how much water was involved in this. The Denis Cavern is many square miles across, and it leads to waterways that go to other caverns which are about as big. For instance, whenever you jump out of the Barro cave after completing a quest in which you get a wedge, you're jumping into another cavern called Radina, which is almost as big as Denis. And that's just one of, and there are 4 total major caverns like that: Irat, Radina, Denis, and Rolep. There are also many smaller caves and caverns which have the water in them, such as the Yashiman district where the Urkana silo is located. That is a side cavern, and is much smaller than Denis. But they're all interconnected, which is why when you drop pellets into that water, it eventually affects all the others. But we're talking perhaps hundreds of square miles of water, and nobody really understood that. So when they were dropping this pellet, and they were making contests and games and various other means of keeping enthusiasm up, they never saw any progress in the first month. And this started making the explorers angry, because they were working hard and not seeing anything reflected in it on this meter. That was when it first acquired the nickname of Dalek. At first, it was because they viewed the thing as something of a monster, and the name was a bit of an insult, although later it was also somewhat affectionate. After 6 months of that, eventually the DRC realized that this meter was counterproductive and took it away, and simply left the feeding of the lake algae as a kind of private project for people to do if they pleased. And that is why you never see this thing today until we bring it out for you. Okay, and then let's see, there's nothing else really important to say up here, so there is basically one, maybe 2 more things I want to show you, and that'll be it for today's tour. I had mentioned that on the other side of the door into the tower, the harbor master's office, there was a large room, but that we couldn't go into it. Now I'm going to try and show you why. Okay, if you look over at the tower from where we are now, you'll see why we can't go through that door. Something happened which basically knocked a hole in the side of the tower and ripped out most of the floor of the room on the other side of that door. You can walk over there and see remnants of the floor, but most of it is gone. If you look above that damage, you'll see the panoramic windows that I was talking about for the harbor master's office itself. I had mentioned that the tower has its shape because of its purpose. They had the office itself elevated so that they could, with the windows all around it, so they could see traffic on the water. And then above the office itself is the lighthouse, and that's what I wanted to show you next. The lighthouse, by the way, had two reflectors on arching above it at one point, but one of them is broken off and is just a stump left. The other one is rather damaged. While we're waiting to see if Mirfak can make us a platform so that we can see the top of the tower, I did want to apologize because this went on a heck of a lot longer than I had actually intended for it. I thought I was going to try and keep the time down near to 2 hours, and it went long over that. I actually spent 45 minutes just inside the museum, which I certainly had not intended to do. So I thank you all for your patience and sticking with me through all this. So once we see whether or not Mirfak can take us up where you can see the top of this building, that will be the end of the official tour, and we'll go into playtime, and you can wander around as you please. Okay, and here we go. This is the lens of the beacon of part of the lighthouse, which is at the very top of the tower. UTL is standing next to one of the reflectors, and you'll notice that there is a big stump just to the right of it, which is where the second half of the reflector would have once been. I believe this platform is large enough to where you can go past the reflector and see the top of the ferry terminal building itself as well. The ferry terminal is covered by what I call a flying roof. It's 4 sections and you can see the seam lines between them. It's freestanding, which is why I call it a flying roof. It's not actually connected to much of anything except at the lower point, to anything except the lowest points. It covers the wall and also part of the a building at the far end. That building is also part of the ferry terminal. However, there's no visible way to get into it. Instead, you may have come down from through corridors or tunnels from Tokita 2, or else perhaps there was a walkway underneath the pavement of the esplanade that led to it. Unfortunately, I don't know the truth of that one. And that is it for today's tour. After this, you are free to wander around and do as you please and use all the bot commands. Also, we'll see if Murphak has anything planned for us. There will be no music today. Joker, unfortunately, has been busy and didn't have time to set anything up. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for your patience in putting up with this rather long tour. And yes, Murphak did an excellent job with the special effects. He took you almost everywhere that was on my wish list.